Well, good morning. Open your Bibles with me to Mark chapter 3, verse 13. We're going to look at a very short and simple passage this morning. And I've got the whiteboard, so watch out. I want to show something to you today that's going to be also on the screens, and we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But, you know, in our day and age, we tend to use the word community loosely, okay? This isn't just in the church, this is all throughout our culture, is that we kind of use it loosely as a term to catch all when people are in a same proximity or same place or have some sort of common attribute. But I want to expand this morning our understanding of biblical community. Expand our understanding of biblical community. What does it mean to have a community of authentic friendships? And this is the close of our series with something I'm going to share today that really has been brewing in me for many, many years. And if you've ever had time with me in my office or in your home where we talk through a crisis or even a loss of some sort, you know that I'm about to share a very important teaching on how we understand ourselves to live in authentic community and friendships. We know Christians are called to live in community. The early church believers show the best example of this. They eat together, pray together, share everything in common. And their lives are best illustrated in Acts chapter 2 when we hear these words. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. Everyone was filled with awe. When's the last time you were filled with awe? When's the last time you saw wonders and miracles, right? But this is what was happening in this community. And it was the result of, it was the culmination of what Jesus had embodied in his own life. Look at this very brief description of the beginning of Jesus' ministry, what he is doing here, starting with verse 13. Jesus went up on the mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. This is the word of the Lord, friends. Thanks be to God. Very simple. We usually read these words, we pass over them, but notice something that Jesus is doing, and I'm going to really get to this in just a few minutes, but that he is calling people to himself already. And not just any people, not just any number of people, not 2 or 3 people or 5 or 6, 12. And if we know the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, 12 had incredible meaning because the 12 tribes of Israel represented the family, the community of God. And now Jesus was claiming 12 individuals to establish this new community. Jesus never said, "Thou shalt go to church." No, he created a new community, a new way of relating that was a healing of the old way. This 12 tribes, 12 disciples coming together, and they did life together. He gathered with them. He prepared them. He appointed them, Mark tells us, that they might be with him and that he might send them out. This is so interesting because Jesus wasn't interested in a class. He wasn't interested in a synagogue practice or a gathering of some sort. No, he wanted to practice community. They would eat together. They'd learn together. They'd pray together. They would try to do ministry together. But they also fought with each other. They also competed with one another. Remember the argument about who's first? Who gets to be first in the kingdom of God? And then as a result of that fighting and that rubbing shoulders, there was reconciliation and they washed each other's feet. You see, Jesus was forming this highly emotionally intelligent, life-on-life, spirit-filled, transformational community where his followers, his disciples, were called and shaped and formed and then sent. And friends, this is the work of Jesus even today. Jesus is still calling, and he made this staggering promise in Matthew chapter 18 that holds true even today. He says, "Wherever 2 or 3 of you are gathered in my name, there I am in the midst of you." Wherever 2 or 3. Jesus is here right now in our community gathering in this room. He said that this is the spiritual life. This is what it means to walk with God in our lives, is to be with others, not in isolation, but in community. In other words, disciples don't get formed in isolation. In other words, Jesus, who is always present, is uniquely present in a community of friends. In a community of friends. Scott Peck, a brilliant writer and psychiatrist, after converting to Christianity years ago, began to look at God's plan for human friendship and community and what gets in the way. What keeps us from experiencing authentic community the way that Jesus established with his first followers and his first disciples? Maybe you remember some of his books, but he had a very interesting concept about how to move from current levels of friendship, if you will, to a more sincere, genuine form of friendship and community. Peck said that what we long for, what we ache for, is something called true community. Let me just draw this up. I'm going to have it on the screens as well. But we long for true community, okay? I'm going to dazzle you with my drawing gifts, okay? Okay. What we long for is authentic community, okay? I put it on the screens for you there. Don't take pictures, it's copyrighted. Okay. We long for this authentic community, okay? And this is the place where people get real, where masks are taken off, and people show up for one another, and they speak truth to one another. And they know and they're known by each other. This is the authentic community that Jesus fostered and built, and it starts right here in Mark chapter 3. This is something each of us longs for, Peck says. However, Peck points out that we often experience instead something different. And he calls it this. He calls it pseudo-community. I think I spelled that. No, nobody can read it anyways. Don't worry about it. Pseudo-community. Pseudo-community. This is a less satisfying version of authentic community. And it's here where we live with masks. We're obsessed with how we project ourselves to the world. We care deeply about how we look, how we appear, the presence of our homes, our cars, our surface, if you will. This is where we project our best selves. It's like the first date version of ourselves. Do you remember that? Man, I was amazing. So was Jenny. That first date version of ourselves is always projecting the best possible image of who we are. Never cracks in the surface, right? But that's not the person that you end up actually living life with if you have ever experienced marriage. Is you get past the pseudo and you have very quickly to get to the authentic side. But the first date version of ourselves is what pseudo community tends to dwell on. It's this type of community that people might hang out together, be polite and pleasant when talking with each other, but the primary dynamic of pseudo-community, get this, the primary dynamic of pseudo-community is conflict avoidance. Conflict avoidance, which doesn't transform anyone. This is rampant in our larger culture. So the real question becomes, how do you move from pseudo-community to authentic community? This is the question that Peck was obsessed with. How do you go from here to here? And of course, he was transformed by looking at the life of Jesus. And he says, you don't just move in a straight line from this to this. It doesn't work that way. Rather, you have to enter into and go through what he calls the tunnel of chaos. And the tunnel of chaos is a journey. For you to get to authentic community from this place, you have to go through the tunnel of chaos. You have to go into this tunnel. Now, if you wish to wind up someday in authentic community of friendships, of being known and knowing others, if you think you're going to wake up someday and genuinely be close with others, well, you're dreaming. In fact, it's probably going to get worse. If left to itself, pseudo-community gets worse, not better. And Peck said that the only way for that to change is for someone to invite another into some risky conversations, to enter into this tunnel of chaos, and to explore what is in that place. And only then, when we believe in faith that God can work in that tunnel, do we have the possibility of leading better, deeper, more fulfilling friendships. I can attest to this in my own life. I could tell 100 stories about my relationships with family members or staff members or lay members in our church, or with friendships where I had to say, you know what? We've got to take some time for a difficult conversation. And I have to address some things. It's not okay for us to stay in the pseudo zone. We've got to go deeper. And I have to invite that person to join me in a new level of honesty and vulnerability. And usually I have to confess some sin. And I have to confess that I have a part to play in having a broken or a conflicted relationship. But friends, I'm telling you, I would never take that risk with anyone unless I didn't believe by faith that transformation would happen. Peck says what's required to get to authentic community is entering into this tunnel of chaos. Somebody has to take the step into the unknown, take a risk, show up, have courage. But this is fascinating. At the first experience in this raw vulnerability, what he says is when people experience this raw vulnerability in the tunnel of chaos, most will dig and scratch and crawl to get back up to the comfort of pseudo community. It's just too hard. It's just too scary, too difficult. I have to tell you that here at UPC, we don't want that. That's not the spiritual life that Jesus established. Why? Because there's no growth there. There's no growth in pseudo community. The world will never change by pseudo community. Pseudo community isn't interested in changing the world for the better, for healing the brokenness of our community, or embodying the love of Jesus. I recently had a difficult conversation with a friend a few weeks ago, and I felt a little distance with him, and I thought I knew what it was all about, so I called him up and I said, we've got to get together for lunch and have a talk. And my heart was beating fast because I thought, oh man, if this goes sideways, and if this increases distance between us, this is going to be really painful. What if he doesn't see the way that I see it? And what if I don't see the way he sees it? What if it wrecks something? And I prayed, God, I am going into the tunnel. I'm going into this tunnel to speak the truth in love, and I'm going to trust you in this. Because I knew staying in pseudo land was a recipe for disaster. No friendship gets better in this place. And so we got down into the tunnel, and we had this lunch, and for a while I tried to sort out what's going on, and we got to the deepest part of some things that were going on. I was like, oh, God, please, would you just work in this time? And then God revealed just a little bit of light to me about the way I was seeing things and behaving, and he revealed a little bit of light to my friend. And we came to a greater understanding, and we came out the other side to authentic, more genuine friendship. One where I trust him. I trust him to tell me things I need to hear, and he trusts me. Do you want to be a more loving friend? You want to be someone who's sincere in your friendships? You want a marriage that's sincere, don't you? Try that again. You want a marriage that's sincere, don't you? Yes. Yeah. We're going to offer marriage counseling after the service in the gymnasium. You want relationships with your kids that are more sincere, don't you? Yeah. Well, you're probably going to have to take some faith-inspired risks and enter into that tunnel of chaos. And I would seriously invite you just to read through the Gospels and see how often, in fact, I would argue that there are very rarely any exchanges Jesus has with anyone in the Gospels that don't move towards this place. That every exchange was one of meaning, where he was pushing someone to get past the surface level to the deeper meaning. And Jesus did this all throughout the Gospels. He wasn't afraid of going through that tunnel because he knew it was on the other side. I'm going to get even more practical than this, just to show you how you've got to put rubber to the road to see something really happen and to increase your capacity for authentic friendships. Some of you right now, as you think about what I'm talking about, some of you are thinking of the person right now, and you're really wishing that you could be on this end of the tunnel. You're really wishing that you could have a more genuine, sincere friendship, and you could get past a conflict or a brooding issue, whatever it may be, but you just don't feel like you have the courage. And you're scared about making that phone call or sending the text and setting up the meeting. I'm telling you, you've got to reach out as soon as you can. You think you can't send that text or make that call, but you can. See if God will give you the strength to do that. It may take more than one conversation, and it's my experience that if you stay at this, God will honor your faith, and He will move through with you to the other side. But who is it that you need to talk with? What is the issue that needs to be discussed and worked through? Now, you may think to yourself, I don't even have relationships that are safe for that. How do we take steps into that tunnel? How do we even have the courage to step off into the tunnel of chaos and to move towards authentic, satisfying, life-giving relationships? Well, I'm going to suggest we follow the model of Jesus in Mark chapter 3. Okay? I'm going to give you 3 movements that Jesus shows us in His own life and ministry very early on. And the first way to get from pseudo-community to authentic community involves the step of initiating connection. Initiating connection. Just like how Jesus recruited His disciples and built a little community. I want to encourage you, friends, by the way, here at UPPC, and part of the emphasis of this series was to want to encourage you to expand your spiritual community of friendship here at UPPC. To expand your little community of friendship here at UPPC. I'm convinced that those who've been here for decades, yes, they're proud about various building campaigns and movements of ministry that occurred. But what matters most, and some of you are longtime members, you've been here for forever, and you will attest to this clearly to everyone here, is that what matters most is your community of friendships. The friendships that God has created in this place. More so than worship services or music that's done beautifully, or special events or prayer moments. All those are important and they're meaningful. But what matters most is the authentic community of friendships that you've experienced. It's a gift for me to see that in folks in our church that have had a community of friendships that have gone on for years and years. And they're reaping the benefits of that authentic community. And I'm telling you, initiating connection is the start of all of that. That you can't have this community of friendships without the tunnel of chaos, without having to work at it. Initiate connection as Jesus did. And maybe you need to just consider taking that step of faith into a new small group. Some folks, honestly, have been part of small groups, and I'm going to push a little bit here, have been a part of small groups that for the most part lived in pseudo-community land. And you can only do that for so long. You can only do that for so long. Until you need to press into and develop more authentic community, or you need to find a new small group, and that's okay. But maybe it's finding a new small group, or finding a ministry to serve in with others. Margaret Wheatley, a fantastic writer on church growth and church thinking, says this. She says, the best way to form deep relationships, and the one that makes the ties bind between us and other people, is to do meaningful work together. It's not brunches per se. It's not evenings out or dinners over with new friends from church. It's to do meaningful work together. Maybe your step into the tunnel of chaos is going to be to serve in some capacity and to be a part of a ministry with people that are different than you. There's just something about meaningful work that creates bonds, but it takes initiating. Many of us here have experienced authentic community, and we were real involved in a setting that cultivated bonds of authentic friendship. And the question I always ask folks when they share about deep, meaningful experiences that are indicative of authentic community, I said, how did that happen at UPPC? Just tell me. Tell me a little bit of the details of how you got to this place. And the question is how did you get involved? And I ask this all the time, and how did you find friendships here at UPPC? And the number one answer is somebody asked me to join in a ministry serving or in a mission trip or on a team. 1999, Valerie and Dave Zeke. Todd and Teresa Silver. Group of adults that came on a mission trip to Mendenhall, Mississippi. Do you remember this? And the 16 minivans that we had, the presidential caravan, we called it. And I'll never see that group of people differently or the same, because it was so powerful to just do meaningful work together on a mission trip. We established deep friendships. And when I ask people that question, how did you find deep friendships? It was because someone asked me to be a part of something meaningful. Now, on the other hand, when people who are not involved are asked how come they're not involved, does anybody want to guess what the number one answer is? Nobody asked. Nobody asked. So ask. I'd say don't even wait to be asked. Initiate. Take the step of initiating community. I have a young man in our church. I love this. He called me up last week and said, I don't have anyone in my life who wants to have conversations at this level. Would you have coffee with me and just share 5 books you're reading? I said, I can do that if you're buying the coffee, right? No, just joking. Just joking. Yeah, I love that. And I'm like, let's get out of this zone of how work is and how much the kids are growing and how the Seahawks are doing. And let's talk about the more meaningful things of life. How is your marriage really? Let's talk about, one of the books I'm reading is on how to raise a daughter. I want to be a better dad to a daughter. Okay? How is it going with your little girl? Let's talk about that. Okay? That's the place, the tunnel. Now, is it risky? Yeah. Is it vulnerable? Yes. That's part of the challenge. Okay? Which gets me to my second step, which is the risk of challenging each other. Jesus was just a master at this, which is the step of entering into the tunnel of chaos. A true friend, the Proverbs tell us, a true friend will wound because they love. And they'll help you get better as a result of it. Spiritual growth is not a neutral process, friends. It is a battle. Spiritual growth is a battle against sin and complacency and closed-mindedness. And Jesus is always doing this. He's always challenging. Jesus is constantly challenging people to deeper devotion to God, to genuine transformation of their character, to call out spiritual entropy when it's happening and when he sees it in people, and he addresses it with courage. This is what true friends do. And there's one more step. There's a risky step of number 3, which is what my friend did, who we're meeting tomorrow, is being vulnerable in community. Being vulnerable in community. One of the most amazing aspects of Jesus' ministry was his transparency. Where his disciples saw Jesus tired or fearful or angry or rejected. Jesus was transparent before his disciples. He allowed them, gave them freedom to live fully into their humanness. We live in a culture where image management is like an art. Agreed? I'm about to close here, so you can know that I'm about to come to an end here. But image management is like an art. We think that's going to make people think highly of us. And instead, it just isolates us. When we come together and we're open and we're honest in our weaknesses and in our failure, in our humanness, and then we also receive and are open to another's weakness and honesty and failures. That's where real community happens. And we are so hungry for that. Our culture is so hungry for that. It's one of the winsome parts of the gospel is to say, come to UPPC. We're a messed up bunch. Join the club. Right? Come and join a group of broken people trying to make the best of our lives for Jesus, experience his transformation, and to live an authentic community. No pseudo community here. No pseudo community here. I want to encourage our whole congregation to ask. Can you just take this seriously? To ask and pray and challenge each other to grow in relationships with each other, knowing it's the way we grow in the Lord. When the Holy Spirit fell upon the people with great power in Acts chapter 2, this little beautiful community got formed. And God's plan was the creation of this beautiful community on earth with himself included. But it takes courage that we would move through the tunnel of chaos to authentic community. Do you want that? Let me pray for you. Lord, I know this is deep stuff, and often this is just peeling back one layer of a really layered issue. How do we live honestly with you and with each other, and to live into authentic community? Thank you for just the model you give us, Jesus, that you initiate, that you challenge, that you call us to something deeper, and that you show vulnerability. Would you help us to live in such a way that we can move towards authentic community, knowing and being known, living truly as human beings who can trust and mourn and grieve, but also celebrate, to laugh, and to sing. May that be true in our church as we continue to grow in this thing called friendship. We pray this in your name, and everyone said, amen.